Okay, so now we're ready to wrap our guides in place. But first, let me go over how this machine works. What you want to do is clamp it to the table, keep it nice and secure, and get the extra extension clamped out there. Put your spool of thread onto the awl thread here. Okay, take your tag end of the thread. Okay, feed it through the first eye right underneath the spool of thread. Once you go through that first one, you're going to go through the eye in the center of the device. Once you go through that, you're going to come up through the top. Okay. Now you've got your tension device set up. The one way to adjust your tension is by adjusting the wing nut on the side. Looser obviously loosens up the tension. Turning it tighter gets the tension tight. Now that tension's a little too tight, so we want to loosen it up a little bit. We want to be able to pull it so that tension device is at about a 45-degree angle. Or I'm sorry, at a 90-degree angle. So right about there is perfect tension. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our running thread, come over the top of our rod blank, and come up on the right-hand side of our main thread. Okay, the reason why we come up on the right-hand side is because we're wrapping to the right. If we were wrapping in the opposite direction to the left, we would come up on the left-hand side of our main running thread. So we're going to come up on the right. The two threads are going to come together. Now we want to start about 1/4 of an inch or so away from the point of the guide. Again, this is all preference, but the more threads you put on, the more epoxy you have to put on, the heavier the guide is going to be, or the heavier your rod's going to be. Okay, once the two pieces of thread come together, take a thumb and put it right where both the threads come together and let go of your tag end. Let it hang there. Now, as you begin to rotate the rod blank towards you, take this thread and just cross it over one time. Okay, as you go around, you're going to come around to your tag end a second time. Once you come over your tag end a second time, you're good to go. Now, with the burnishing tool, the flat side of the burnishing tool, what we're going to do is we're going to just square up the outside edge. And each time we're rotating, we're adding one more layer of thread. Once you get it nice and squared up, we've got a particular angle here. Okay, that angle comes into play to make sure that each thread lays right next to the one prior. So each time we wrap, the thread should lay right next to the one prior. Now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap over top of this tag in about 6 times. We need to secure that in place. Once we do that, we want to unravel the thread. Take your razor blade, nice sharp razor blade, lay your razor blade flat on your rod blank, and pull your tag end to it. Cuts it right off. Don't use this as a saw, as this possibly could cut the wrap that you just put in place. Now what we're going to do is we're going to continue our wrap. Again, this angle is extremely critical. If you have the correct angle, every thread will lay to the one prior. If you do not, what will end up happening is you will get gaps just like that. Okay? So what we want to do is make sure we have that correct angle. Now I'm coming up to that guide foot. We're going to test to see if JL did a good job of prepping our guide feet. And it looks like he's done a pretty good job because it transitioned right up the rod.
Yeah,
up the guide
if we
foot.
didn't do any filing there, that guide would just pop. The thread would come right back on itself. It wouldn't want to go smoothly up the guide foot.
We're going to use our burnishing tool just to touch up every once in a while to make sure we're there. And we're going to continue our wrap. Now we're going to wrap all the way up to our tape. Don't take your tape off prior to getting to that point. You run the risk of the guide falling off. Okay, now we're just about to the thread. Now, it's always a good idea to leave a little tag in on the thread because as you're wrapping, you can actually undo the thread at the same time, or undo the tape at the same time. And then we're just going to continue our wrap. The nice thing about this machine is if you do make a mistake, okay, you can always undo your mistake. If you notice, as I was unwrapping, the tension device was still keeping tension on the thread.
Now you're just gonna wrap all the way up to the guide foot, right, where it ends up making a V.
We're gonna wrap all the way up to that point, but prior to that point, we're gonna stop about 6 to 8 threads before we get to that point. Now, that little piece of thread that I cut off earlier, we're gonna utilize that. We're just gonna bend it into a little loop. We're gonna take that little loop, and insert it into underneath the main thread, and we're gonna wrap over our loop. Now we're going to wrap up to the point where the guide goes from the foot to the leg, which is right there. Now, what we want to do, we've just done a lot of work. We don't want it to go away. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a finger right where everything comes together, okay? This now becomes your tension device. Now we're going to remove a little bit of tension off of the spool, take our razor blade, cut our thread. Again, my thumb is now the tension device. Take that piece that we just cut, and we're going to drop it in our loop. Pull it up like it's still attached to the main thread, and now I can remove my thumb. Now this hand has become my tension device. With your other hand, take your loop and start pulling it back through. And just pulling the thread right back up underneath itself. With your razor blade, come in here, lay your razor blade flat, and pull to it. We've got a couple of little gaps in there which we'll clean up with the round side of our burnishing tool. There we go, we got a wrap. Now, what I just did with the burnishing tool was I had a few gaps, and the reason why I had a few gaps is I may not have had that perfect angle, and one thread wasn't laying right next to the one prior. What happens is you end up getting some gaps in your thread. Your thread's round. With the burnishing tool, as you rub over top of the thread, you're taking the round thread and flattening it. When you take something round and you flatten it, it spreads out left and right, and it closes up all those gaps. Makes it look like you were perfect. And that's a wrap.